our Sunny Side Up and show program on YouTube. Center Makor is supported by Combined Jewish Philanthropies, the Jewish Federation in Massachusetts, by donors, sponsors like our viewers and members of our community. And I would like today welcome to our show Jeremy Burton, Executive Director of Jewish Community Relations Council. Jeremy, hi, welcome to Sunny Side Up and show.
Thank you, Vladimir, for having me here.
Yes, Jeremy, first of all, you are, I don't know, you are around politicians, or you consider yourself as politician and Jewish politician, or politician on behalf of Jewish community? How you describe actually your position, who you are, as a professional, who you are?
That's a really interesting question, because first, thank you again, Vladimir, for having me on. It's been a long time making this happen. You know, my first career was actually in New York City politics, and so there was a time in my life where I actually aspired to be a, quote, politician. I don't consider myself a politician, no more than I think of, say, all the professionals who support the public officials in state and federal government. I don't consider all the professionals behind the scenes working in that environment to be politicians themselves. I would say I'm somebody who has a job that is very political. And I do very political work on behalf of our community, but I am not a politician. But I have some training in the art.
Great, some training, yeah. Like, I'd say like near politician, yeah?
Yes.
Something like that. Jeremy, a little bit more, before we'll come to yourself, just couple words shortly, maybe later we will go more widely. I want to introduce JCRC to our community, to Russian-speaking community. I believe not many people in our community are really familiar with JCRC and what it stands for.
Sure.
And what it's a part in community.
So this is part of the story of how the American Jewish community came to be the way it is. Which is that about 76 years ago now in Boston, but this is happening all over the country around the same time, local Jewish communities were dealing with huge challenges, in particular anti-Semitism, the Jewish refugees coming out of and after the Holocaust, and then a few years later, of course, the creation of the State of Israel and the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship. These were all things that Jewish American communities suddenly found ourselves having to deal with and not having enough power to deal with. We didn't see ourselves having access to public officials, to the police, etc., all over this country. And here in Boston, we were experiencing in the early 1940s where Catholic priests and others were literally on the airwaves preaching anti-Semitism, telling the kids to go out and beat up a Jew as a good Sunday afternoon activity. And when the Jews in Dorchester or Roxbury would call the police didn't respond, or they would arrest the Jewish kid who had been beaten up. So that's a story that begins with the idea that for us to have the relationships, the access to government, to civic leaders, to the press, that we needed to come together and stand as one. We had lots of organizations. There were like 14, 15 different organizations already established in Boston at that time, but nobody could get that job done. And over the course of 75 plus years, we've grown to be well over 30 organizations, 40 organizations here in Boston. But around the country, it's also like this, where the idea that some things matter so much to the Jewish community that we have to stand together for them. And for us here in Boston, we have incredibly different kinds of Jewish organizations, some of whom are deeply opposed to each other, have deep disagreements, and some of whom don't really care. I mean, like, we have member organizations like JCCs and others that are just doing cultural events and education.
Like Center Makor.
Well, Center Makor is not a member, and that we should talk about why that is, but you've been on the council on behalf of Center Makor for a while. But we also have groups like AIPAC or the Israeli American Council, and groups that are very seen as lefty or on the right, maybe. So I'm not going to name names because I don't want to like single anybody out. Yeah, but we definitely have groups that if you look at them, you say they're pretty lefty or they're pretty far to the conservative side. But there's an understanding that there's got to be some way to work together to make sure that public officials, faith leaders, the media, etc., understand how we see ourselves as a Jewish community, what we care about, and where we have deep agreement, and even where we have some complexity and nuance in our differences.
You know what, since I involved to JCRC meetings, that JCRC Council, yes. I started to more understand what's going on. Before, for me, was like Jews, very small amount of Jews, like 0.01% of total population, so much involved in politics, trying to change something, trying to raise the voice. Not the way what we were about Jewish politics in former Soviet Union. There was no Jewish politics at all.
Sure.
But I involved there as a community representative. You are correct. I'm representing maybe somehow the Russian Jewish community there, maybe on not on big scale, but that's my community involvement. Not professional, but you are involved in that professionally. Instead of go to big politics, be senator or congressman, maybe. I don't, you know, I'm not talking about president, but how it started for you. Jeremy Burton grew up like a young kid, teenager, in some synagogue or not. How it all started for you?
It's quite a story, but before I tell you, I'll say one thing, Vladimir, because you talked about your time on the council, and it's been great having you on the council for the last, I think, 5 years now. About you know, one of the things I love about my job and the work I get to do, particularly working with working with the Jewish community here in Boston, is that almost everybody I get to talk to on a day-to-day basis in our community will tell me something like, and I'm sort of quoting, "Everyone I know agrees with me that," and then they fill in the blank. And like, I can go around the community and we're talking about police issues, or we're talking about Israel, or we're talking about anti-Semitism, and somebody will say, "Everybody I know agrees with me that," and then later the same day, somebody else will tell me, "Everybody I know agrees with me that," and says the exact opposite thing. And what I love, as you referenced it about our council and other places like that, is that folks come from all the different parts of the community and they have to sit there and have conversations and debate and discuss with people who are really the other version of that everybody agrees. And it forces us to recognize that our community is incredibly diverse. We have a lot of very interesting different ways of thinking about what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be a Jewish community, what a Jewish community cares about. And we're made better by having those conversations with each other. You know, me in my one synagogue, most of us tend to have the same ideas about how to observe Judaism, mostly. You know, me in my one book club, most of us have similar politics. But when I get out and engage with Jews of very different synagogues or Jews in very different cultural institutions, I actually learn a lot more about my Jewish community and come to love it more. So having said that, listen, I grew up in New York City. I have an interesting backstory because neither one of my parents grew up in a Jewish home, although my father was Jewish by birth. My father grew up in an interfaith Jewish family. My mother grew up in a Catholic family, and she chose to become Jewish as a young adult in college. And they decided to become Orthodox Jews. And so I grew up in the Orthodox and in mostly, and I would say, you know, half and half in the modern Orthodox and in the Haredi community in New York. It's a long story. We're not going to spend an hour on just that.
It's very interesting, yes.
But, you know, I grew up in both the Haredi and the modern Orthodox worlds. And I will say very honestly to you that I love that world. I got so much out of it. It enriched my life. The idea of community, the way people care for each other, the way if somebody's in trouble, everybody would just drop everything, come running and support you. And if somebody needed a place to eat, the idea of understanding the world and our place in it as Jews, there was so much I got out of it. And I also struggled with that world. I struggled with some things about that community that I was a part of, how it understood the world. And I also struggled, frankly, because I was a kid in the 80s in the Haredi community in New York City, and I knew I was gay. And that was hard. It was hard to be a kid coming to terms with that. This is like so long ago. People didn't talk about this stuff, and certainly not in Jewish communities, not even in more liberal Jewish communities. So the process for me of really coming to understand how much I value and treasure Jewish community really led me to be, I'm making my commitment of my life to the interests of Jewish community. And for a variety of reasons, as a young adult, I was going to be a politician, as for you're discussing. And I actually met through my synagogue president, who had been an aide to the mayor of New York City in the 60s and 70s. I met other candidates running for office who were coming to our synagogue, coming to candidate forums. And I got my first internship in college with a candidate for mayor of New York City. And I ended up working in politics for about 10 years for full transparency, exclusively with Democrats. I used to be definitely a Democratic political operative. And at some point, I came to the decision that this was not what I wanted to be doing with my life, that my work in this world was about really building Jewish community, and especially about how the Jewish community engages with public officials and civic space. And that's a very short version of a long process that led me really to the kind of work that I get to do at JCRC.
A great story. Now, when I come to different events or meetings of council, you know what, you always practically not that much serious. You are energetic, you are positive, extra positive energy from you going to anywhere, to everybody, even if council need to decide something unpretty things. Oh, well, not very unpretty, but sometimes tough decisions, which come with long debates and in groups conversations, and people disagree, even between council. But you are always so energetic and so positive. Are you always like that, or sometimes you have breakdowns? I know, going slower, maybe, you know, forget about all of this. What is your energy and where you come, where it's come from?
You're very kind. I try to be playful in this world. I think that the work we do and the challenges we face, when you think about the threats to the Jewish community, rising anti-Semitism, when you think about the challenges Israel's facing, when you think about the big hard issues our country is facing right now, if you just look at all the hard stuff and the threats and spend all your time on that, you can really get down. So I try to be playful. I have toys in my office. I have toys on the shelf behind me.
Yeah, I see Deep Space Nine.
Yes. Oh, good man. You can recognize my Deep Space Nine. Yeah. Very good. You get a bonus point. And then, you know, so I try to keep that sort of a lightness and a playfulness in my life as a balance to all of the serious issues we deal with. You know, do I get down? Of course I get down. You know, there's always am I a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of guy? And a lot of people I know would say I'm a glass 9/10 empty, which is to say, in being a JCRC director, you have to be prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and have a strategy for what's in between. So, you know, I always worry about the worst possible outcome of an election, or, you know, the worst case scenario of something that's going on. But I have the long picture. I have a long horizon. And, you know, I always remind myself, even in the darkest things, we have survived for well over 2,000 years as a Jewish people. Whatever craziness is happening right now this month here in Boston, it's a tiny piece of the long story of our people. And even when something huge and enormous like the rising sense of anti-Semitism the last couple of years in the United States, it's like, you know, we've been dealing with anti-Semitism for 2,000 years. The fact that we stopped worrying about it the last couple of decades in the United States, that was the unusual moment. This too we can handle, and I think that's really I believe in the strength of our community. I believe in the strength of people, and I believe in the basic goodness of most people, and that keeps me going and gives me the strength. But do I occasionally end up, let's say, curled up under the desk in my little, you know, working at home now for 5 months at the end of the day, maybe with a good glass of whiskey? Yeah.
Whiskey is always good and helping to bring mood up, not
especially with a little herring.
Yes. Listen, before we're going back to JCRC, a little personal question. You know, we should program with Rabbi Hamilton and figure out what his name came out. Actually, came out. Question: is it Burton your original family name? Not, I understand yours it is, but in the family.
Well, of course.
And origins of the family, maybe also from some part of former Russia.
I'm glad you asked, because there's an I think it's about the story of American Jews, how I ended up with Burton. So my grandfather, who was third generation American Jew, my great grandparents on that side, of course, came from Hungary in the 1870s. And my grandfather was born on Staten Island in New York City, right around 02, 04. His name was Moshe Bergstein. And his brother Levi Bergstein, this is 1920, 1925 in New York City. His brother wanted to be a sportscaster. He wanted to report and call on the radio and in the New York press baseball and boxing. That was all he wanted to do. And
very cool.
Very cool. Yeah, but unfortunately, in 1922 or something, whoever his mentor was like, a guy named Levi Bergstein is never going to get a job calling the Brooklyn Dodgers games on New York radio. So my great uncle Levi Bergstein changed his name to Louis Burton. And my grandfather, this is one version of the story, wanting to have the same name as his brother, Moshe Bergstein of Staten Island became Milton Burton of Harlem, and then on to Indiana. And that is how we ended up being the Burtons. And it's a very typical, I think it's a very classic American Jewish story of trying to have an Americanized name to work in certain industries that weren't as accepting or ready to tolerate Jews.
Yeah, you know, it's a real story, because there's a big immigration wave from Tsar's Russia, 19th century and beginning of 20th century. Huge amount of Jews came and started to change names to Americans. They wanted put it away their Russian background or European background, like Hungarian Jews or Poland Jews or Russian or Ukrainian Jews, Russian Jews. That's a really typical story.
Yeah. Ironically, look, my great uncle ended up having a very good career in the New York sports industry. So I assume it was the right decision for him. Ironically, my grandfather ended up working in the sciences and in the Manhattan Project, the atomic project, and all, most of the people around him had very Jewish names, like, from the old German scientists and stuff. But we are the Burtons. My father grew up with a very Gentile name in Indiana.
Yeah. Maybe it's a Gentile name. Maybe it's a regular American name. Maybe it's not a very Gentile. You were talking about anti-Semitism. how Jews were not allowed to get some work here in the United States. Right now, it's all disappeared, except anti-Semitism. It's on the rise, I believe. Everybody see what we have more and more anti-Semitism. And today I receive lots of emails from ADL, AGC, some else, JCRC, who else? I don't, it's like long list.
Yeah.
Like everybody talking about anti-Semitism. For me, fight anti-Semitism, it's looks like really take some weapons and go fight.
Right.
Does it mean really fight, or it's mean more educational process? Because I actually think more about it more as educational process.
Yeah. So I think that it's a great question, because I think lots of different organizations approach that question of, is it a fight or is it an education, based on other things that they think about how we work in the world and what we have to do. And I think it's a little bit of both. But I think let's be frank about this. We're not going to defeat anti-Semitism. So if we say it's just a fight, we're trying to fight anti-Semitism, we're not going to defeat it. Anti-Semitism has been around for 2,000 years, practically. The idea that it's suddenly going to go away, or suddenly we're going to have the way to beat it, that nobody else has beaten it before. The thing about anti-Semitism is it rises and falls in different societies and different countries at different times. And it usually has to do with when a lot of people, when people are under stress, when people are under threatened, when they want somebody to blame. Certainly in Western civilization, and I'm going to say that, let's talk particularly about that because we are in a Western country. Anti-Semitism rises when people want somebody to blame for their troubles. And in hard times, when people are scared, when people have fear, bad leaders, bad public figures play on those fears, and one of the things they use is anti-Semitism. So right now in the United States, I think it's rising for a variety of reasons on the left and on the right, but it comes from people wanting somebody to blame for their problems, or wanting somebody to blame for what they think is wrong in the world. And we can push back. We can push back for 5 years or 10 years or something. And also people's fears might go down, or people's need for somebody to blame might go down. And then we'll say, oh, we're winning the war on anti-Semitism. And then 20 years later, there'll be more fears and more anxiety. It'll be back again. So I don't think it's a fighting thing. What I would say is this: there's a difference between anti-Semites and people who say anti-Semitic things. And I think it's an important difference. There are people in this world who are committed Jew haters. They live to hate Jews. We're not going to do a list of who they are. Everybody's got their own list. They're not just on the right or on the left. They're not one ideology. But there are people in this world who truly hate Jews. They have no interest in being anything other than a Jew hater. That's one group of people. There are a lot more people, and you think about a lot of the people, for example, you see people in sports saying something, or a celebrity in the media who says something, and maybe they say something once or twice. They say something that's anti-Semitic, or very honestly, even friends, people in my life, people who I interact with all the time, who maybe make a joke that they think is okay because they heard a Jewish friend say it, or they say something anti-Semitic, and then we have to educate them. For those people, this is how we experience this as Jews. This is what you're doing when you do that. This is how you make us feel. This is how you exclude us. We have to be able to talk to those people. And if those people are willing to say, I want to understand the pain I'm causing to Jews. I want to understand why what I said is harmful. I want to grow from this. Then they're not anti-Semites. They're people who say anti-Semitic things, just like there are people who don't want to be racist, but occasionally say a racist thing, for example. They can be educated. But there is a fight. And it's not a fight to defeat the anti-Semites. It is a fight to keep the anti-Semites from infecting the mainstream of our society. Yeah. So I know I can't defeat the David Dukes of the Louis Farrakhan's of this world. And I know that even when the David Dukes and Louis Farrakhan's of this world are gone, there will be others in other societies at other times. But what we have to do is insist that these people can't be part of civil society, that they can't be normalized, they can't be tolerated, and that we as Jews can live successfully and comfortably and thrive in a country in which there are 1%, 2%, I don't know what number of the population are anti-Semites, as long as those people are not allowed to participate in genteel society by the rest of people. And so what we have to fight is the tendency of people who are not anti-Semites to poo-poo and say, it's only a part of what they care about, or that person matters for other reasons, or I'm not endorsing the anti-Semitism, but I want to deal with them on other things. That's what we have to fight. The tendency to minimalize and normalize the anti-Semites.
Yeah, very great position. You know what, as a, let's say, Russian-speaking Jew or Soviet Jew, I went through different types of anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. As a personal, physical, when people tried to beat me only because I am Jew, nothing else. And they even didn't know my name. Political or educational, when my friends couldn't get to college what they wanted to, or at the end of the school didn't receive honor of be the best, only they put it like second of the best, like silver medal, not gold medal, like my mom or my friend, were denied only because they're Jew. Professional level, when we performed with my ensemble, dance ensemble in Ukraine or Moldova or other parts, we've got meetings of protesters in front of the theaters with signs hating Jews. My diploma was almost stopped because it was Jewish dance. And after even Ukraine became independent, I got it from different sources, not on political level, but most on personal level, let's say. Political level gone. Right now in Ukraine, practically no anti-Semitism. In Russia, it's also forbidden. But here in the United States, what can we do to really start this process? I'll tell you also shortly. In my group in Kiev, I've got like almost 50% Gentiles. And I saw this way, what I'm performing, my group performing, we're teaching people of Jewish culture. And then people, Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians, Moldova, wherever in Europe, saw our performance, they become more tolerant, open to Jews. And here I see a Jewish concert for Jews.
Yeah.
Jewish lecture for Jews. If there are one or two non-Jewish people, it's like big deal. Maybe we're too close for others. Maybe we need to open gates.
Yeah, no, and that's an interesting question, or it's an interesting observation. And I'm not sure I agree with you. So I think there is a part of how we do Jewish in America. So let me just say this. I think one of the things that you and I have talked about this, and is like the experience of most Russian-born or first, second generation Russian Jews within our community is a profoundly different one from that of those of us who are third, fourth, fifth generation in America.
You can call yourself American Jew.
Well, first of all, okay, don't make sure I come back to this. Side note, when we talk about who is the story of American Jews, I didn't tell you this, but I mentioned my mother became Jewish in college.
Yes.
My mother's family came to what is now America as hidden Jews from Spain in the 1590s. And we have documented records about my family circumcising their children in Santa Fe, New Mexico in the 1590s and being persecuted as hidden Jews. Now, between 1590 and 1970, they long since forgot the story of their being Jewish, and they were just good Catholics. But when we talk about the story of Jews in America, I have a very personal connection to the idea that it's not a simple story of everybody came between 1890 and 1910 to the Lower East Side of Manhattan and to Chelsea and Revere, even though that is my father's family story. So Jewish America, so I'm describing something, you know, what you described is familiar to me as the experience of Jews who grew up in totalitarian societies. And that's a very real, when the state is the actor that is anti-Semitic, when the state is actively promoting the oppression of Jews, was something that I don't think most Jews who are third generation American Jews can appreciate about the experience that is still very recent for Russian American Jews. And I think it's a big cultural gap between parts of our Jewish communities, in the same way, by the way, that we have a cultural gap between Jewish Americans who've never lived in and never became citizens of the state of Israel, and Israeli Americans who've, you know, lived in Israel as a state for 1, 2, 3 generations and are now moving here as immigrants. And they have an immigrant experience that is more like other immigrant communities who are recent than it is like the other Jews in our communities here in Boston. And they have a Jewish experience, which is very different because it's the Jewish experience of a Jewish state. And there's a gap, so there are cultural gaps within the Jewish community. But we were talking about anti-Semitism specifically, right?
Yes. And I have a question to you. You know, there is an opinion what anti-Semitism in diaspora helps to maintain Jewish population. Jews as Jews.
Yeah. Oh, so we were talking about the culture stuff, and you were talking about how like you go to Jewish events here and it's only Jews.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, like, I think it is important for us as Jewish communities to have some spaces that are our spaces. You know, every community should have places that we can gather as us to have a Jewish experience, whatever that is. And for different people, some people it's like Orthodox prayer, and other people it's a movie and discussion, and for other people it's just a really good restaurant with a certain type of menu, whatever that is. But we need to have some spaces where we can just be Jewish with other Jews and experience our Judaism, learn about our Judaism, celebrate our Judaism. And I appreciate that some of the spaces we end up with, those of us who spend a lot of time in Jewish space in Boston, we might look around and say, oh, the Jewish spaces are just Jews, we're not part of the larger culture. I'm going to disagree with you also on that, because like I think about it, first of all, so much of what's going on in American culture, there's such a deep Jewish component that the Jewish is so infused across American culture that we almost forget. You know, when you hear people of other backgrounds and other ethnicities using Yiddishisms on TV shows and who talk deeply about Jewish concepts and invoking like certain Jewish holidays in their traditions, you know that Jewish culture and Jewish heritage has a bigger role in our society than just our private spaces. And when you go on, I mean, at this point in my life, I get a certain very large chunk of my Jewish culture on like Netflix. And, you know, Netflix is showing, you know, miniseries that are in Yiddish about the Haredi community. And Amazon is showing, you know, documentaries about Jewish communities in upstate New York. And they're showing, you know, Israeli shows, sometimes with subtitles and sometimes without. And I can watch a lot of, not everything, but a lot of what is Israeli TV on American streaming shows. So, and by the way, Netflix is not bringing those shows from Israel to America because 2% of the population is watching them. They're bringing it for an audience that's bigger than us. So I know a lot of Americans, well beyond the Jewish community, are choosing to watch Hebrew language shows and Yiddish language shows on these streaming services, as well as shows about the American.
And they're very popular. I know they're winning like top places in streaming right now.
Yeah.
Question, not question, it's observation, and maybe could be some idea. A Russian-speaking Jewish community is not very religious. For us, it's more a national feeling of being a Jew,
Sure.
because we were treated as a nation inside the Soviet Union.
And I think that makes Russians a lot more like Israelis than it does most American Jews.
First of all, what do you think? Is Jewish community leader, not religious leader, community leader, need to be belonging to some religious movement in Judaism, or could be completely 100% secular?
I do not think that to be a leader within the Jewish community, one has to have any religion at all. One can be a totally secular Jew and be a leader in the Jewish community. And what I think is important is for a Jewish leader, whether you're like me who considers yourself Orthodox, or you're conservative or reform or secular or something else, yada, yada, is to have a deep understanding of why my Judaism matters to me. If I'm going to be a Jewish leader, I better be able to answer the question, this is why my Judaism matters to me. This is why it is an important part of my personal identity, my collective identity, my sense of community, and what I care about there being in the world when I'm gone, i.e., another generation of vibrant Jews. That doesn't have to be a religious or secular. It can be either one of those. I think, and I appreciate this conversation coming up in the context of Center Makor, and you and I having this conversation in particular, given us, because I do think, and I made that comment before about how Russian Jews and Israeli Jews have a more similar sense of this Jewish as nationality, Jewish as a collective nation, and not as my religion. And I think that's a difference between, again, a cultural gap in our community, because so much of American Jewish life in the 19th century and 20th century was built around accepting a Protestant cultural idea that Jews would be accepted if Jews behaved as a religion and kept the religion largely in private space. And it's, I can actually talk about this at great length, and I've written about this, but essentially so much of American civic life, our founding fathers, the Washingtons and Jeffersons, their idea of the public sphere and civic space was built on Protestant ideas that they brought to this then not yet country about religion. You could be Catholic, you could be Lutheran, you could be, Church of England, and yeah, we'll even let you be Jewish, as long as that's what you do in your personal space, in your church, in private, and in public, you're just a civic American. And so we have built the entire infrastructure of Jewish life in America in the 19th century around this idea of we're just a religion. And we're a religion like the Protestants, and we're a religion like the Catholics. Muslims weren't as many accepted or seen in that space, but they were there as well. And we can experience all that is wonderful about America as long as we only think of our Judaism as a religion. And the result is, I think for Russian Jews, for Israeli Americans, they look at us and say, I don't get you. I don't understand what's going on here. And very honestly, for a lot of our own children, the generations who are coming up in the last 25 years in a country that is much more secular, where something like 30% of Americans no longer identify as Christian or anything and are just not. They look at, and they don't see their Judaism as Orthodox or Reform, and they don't understand why be Jewish, and they don't understand why there needs to be a Jewish state. And they say, why should there be a state with a state that's based on a religion? So I think by accepting the anti-Semitism of 18th and 19th century Protestants and allowing ourselves to be defined by their definition of what they will accept from us, we've actually hurt ourselves in our own understanding of who we are as Jews and a Jewish community. And I think we will be benefited if we have more secular Jews who have a strong Jewish identity as a Jewish nationalism, as a Jewish cultural identity, taking on leadership in Jewish life in this country, in the United States. That will actually make us stronger in bringing us back to who we really are as a Jewish people.
Yeah, that's exactly bringing me to our next topic of conversation. You are originally from New York. You grew up there even as a near politician, activist. In New York, actually, there is a pretty much active position of Russian-speaking Jews in domestic politics, not United States politics, but in Brooklyn or in other parts, but they become even senators or like local senators, congressmen. I know them in person, some of them, but there is very active life. In Massachusetts here, we don't have such active political, let's say, or active Jewish leadership life among Russian-speaking Jews. Why do you think it's so? Why we not Russian Jews don't want to participate actively in political life, in Jewish political life, or even in Jewish life in general? They stay aside.
Oh, I don't think that's my question to answer. I should ask you that question because I would never presume to speak for why Russian Jews think a certain way. Or, I mean, I have some understanding and sense of what people in the community like you tell me and teach me and help me understand different parts of the community. But I don't think it's my place to say why Russian Jews in Boston are less political or something, if that's even true. The difference, of course, is, as in so many other things, I mean, it's always bad to compare New York to anywhere else because New York has, 1.2, 1.3 million Jews live in New York City, I think. New York City Jewish community is twice the size of the entire city of Boston. And, one of the things, and let's be honest about this, when you are a huge Jewish community like that, diversity of the community can each have its own sort of chunk of the pie. There are enough people who are Russian Jews in certain, you mentioned some of those districts in Brooklyn, they can elect a member of their community or certainly be a majority or a near majority of the voters in a certain district. The same is true, in New York. I've always joked that on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where I used to live, I can find you, if I said, I want to have a Friday night art school Orthodox Siddur drum circle with meditation, I can find 100 people to do that. Because any tiny little kind of Judaism in New York, you're going to find 100 people for. It's not so easy to do that in Boston, those really slivers. And like when I was living on the Upper West Side, and there were like 5 different synagogues who said we're more conservative than conservative, capital C, and less Orthodox than Orthodox, capital O. And there were 5 different thriving synagogues. That's what happens in an enormous city with 1.2 million Jews. The Russian Jewish community, or any part of the Jewish community in Boston, is not the majority in any neighborhood. And the subsets of our community are not going to be the majority in any state house district or state senate district. So for us to be politically effective as a community, we have to understand that we're not always going to get our way, or that we're going to have to sit in a larger coalition with other people in order to achieve our goals. And for some of us, those coalitions are we sit in a larger community of Jews across all our differences to make sure that we're able to effectively work, say, with the governor and the congressional delegation on concerns like Jewish security. And for other people, it's like my politics, my values, my interests are not where most Jews are in Boston. So the coalitions and spaces I'm going to need to sit in are different coalitions with different partners. And that's okay too. But we just have to be honest about the fact that it's not New York.
Yeah, but I know that.
You
can see it at once when you're coming from Jewish New York back to Boston, you can see it. But anyway, you know what? Right now, it's demographic of Russian-speaking Jews are changed here in Massachusetts. Before it was like mostly settlement movement. You settle up, get a job, get a house, get a hobby, maybe like a car, like get into the life.
Yeah.
right now it's practically gone. Everybody is settled. Better or worse, it's different. But everybody they took his niche inside the American life. But very often it's become the question, who am I? Am I Jew? Am I American? Am I involved in something? And here I believe many people, and especially young people, trying to find answer, but maybe we can help them somehow. Maybe JCRC together with Makor, maybe with Jewish Federation, maybe other organizations. We can step up on it and open doors for them and invite them, because it was much differently done before.
Well, here's I think an important context. I know we're running out of time. The Jewish community in the United States has always been changing, and it's been changing because of the new generations of Jews who come from other places. And all you have to do is look at, like, even here in Boston, you look at the history, and in the, first there were the Jews who were mostly Sephardic Jews, Spanish and Portuguese, and then the first Jews started coming from mostly Germany and Central Europe. And it took a generation for them to get settled, as you say, to become Americanized, and their kids, to some extent, built new Jewish organizations that met their needs, or took over the Jewish organizations that were already there, as they're mostly the second generation who were born here or certainly grew up from very young age here, who sat in between of being enough American to understand the mishigas of our country, and enough deep in their different Jewish experience to say they wanted something different from what was being offered already. And the story of this country, you just look in any city, you look at how there was a Sephardic synagogue, and then there was a German synagogue, and then there was a Hungarian synagogue, and then later on came the Polish synagogues. They didn't just happen overnight. It was each generation breaking away. Or it's the story of how what we call conservative Judaism was responding to what we call Reform Judaism. These are always changing dynamics of American life. Jonathan Sarna at Brandeis University has written extensively on this topic of the ever dynamic changing nature of the Jewish community. So the question, I'm going to take it from what you just said, the question is always, the challenge for us is to accept that American Jewish life will be different in 20 years than it is today. And it will be different in part because young people who care passionately about their Americanism and passionately about their Judaism are choosing to build new organizations and are being given the space to change and lead in the old organizations. And organizations that are willing to make that space and support that change thrive, and the organizations that resist that change won't be here in 25 years from now.
Let's hope what that process of integration will be understood by Jewish organizations, and they will be more turning their face to Russian-speaking Jews, with possibility to bring them in and also take something from them, integrate.
Absolutely.
Spark, big spark. Right now, let me move a little bit from there. You send us pictures where you're with different politicians.
Okay.
Right? I know it's nice to meet them, but how often you need to dine with them, eat with them, and different meal or something like that? It's and then, do you hesitate? Do you need to think, can I eat it or not?
Well, on a personal level, if I understand your question, I long ago came to accept or resolve in myself that if I'm going to do this kind of work effectively, I have to be willing to eat vegetarian out. So while my home is strictly kosher, I will eat vegetarian food in non-kosher restaurants. That's a personal practice. That's a personal choice. But the actual answer is, first of all, I don't dine very often with public officials. We have lots of coffees.
Coffee is kosher.
I have had an extraordinary amount of coffee in my life working in this space. And look, it's my job. If JCRC is serving the needs of our community appropriately, and if I'm doing my job right, it's not about having the dinner with a senator or a member of Congress. It is about having the relationships where when they want to understand the concerns of the Jewish community, we have the relationship to share those concerns. And so sitting down over coffee to talk about the issues, to talk about our concerns, to talk about what's in the paper, that's the core of what we do, is to be heard and to be able to have that relationship. The only place I ever really get to dine a lot with politicians, and I miss this so much right now during COVID, is during our trips to Israel. Because one of the proudest things and one of the most enjoyable parts of my work at JCRC is taking our civic leaders to Israel. We do it about twice a year. We obviously did not do it this summer, and we won't be doing it in December, unfortunately. And the opportunity to sit with, I have taken the president of the Massachusetts Senate, the Speaker of the Massachusetts House, and something like half of the current sitting members of the Massachusetts legislature to Israel over the last 10 years. And those meals, sitting in Jerusalem, sitting in Tel Aviv, sitting in Jaffa, sitting in Haifa, introducing them to some of the best food in the world, including, by the way, Russian food, is one of the times in my life I get to sit and eat with them and really enjoy it. And I miss that right now.
Yeah, we're all missing that. Absolutely. And on this tasty note, our traditional question, what is your preferred recipe for fried eggs?
Okay, so fried eggs. I mentioned that my mother comes from a Sephardic and Mexican background in the Southwest of the United States. I love huevos rancheros. And huevos rancheros are like a scrambled egg, but it's made with refried beans over a tortilla with salsa and onions. And it is a whole meal on a plate, and the eggs are right at the center of it. And there's nothing that makes me happier on a Sunday morning than preparing that tortilla and the eggs and the refried beans and the salsa, and sitting down and saying, this is a meal.
Which is like a special Sunday meal when you feel like what you fill up and relax. Yeah. Jeremy, thank you. And last question, in COVID, what COVID quarantine, what is your address to people, to politicians, maybe to position on voting during upcoming elections, or not to vote upcoming upcoming elections, or wherever you want to wish people during this pandemic?
I'm glad you asked. Look, I think despite the importance of social distancing, voting is our most sacred duty. It is the way we hold our government accountable to the people. And it is the urgent obligation of every member of our community to participate in the primary on September 1st and to participate in the general election in November. Fortunately, because the principle of the sanctity and the sacredness of life and pikuach nefesh are involved in this election in a way that they're not, we did work along with many of our coalition partners over the last couple of months to work with the legislature to make sure that every member of the community can vote by mail absentee if you want to. So if you don't want to go to your voting site on September 1st, you can get an absentee ballot. You should have received one in the mail, or at least an application in the mail. If you didn't get one, you can go to our website, jcrcboston.org right now, both for the primary and for the general, to find out how to get one. We have a voting guide on our website that tells people how to get their absentee ballot. And I don't know when this is going to be live on the website, but I would say time is running out for the absentee ballots because there's a delay. They have to be received by September 1st in the mail. But certainly make a plan to vote, whether it's absentee. If you can't do absentee, there are early voting locations in all of our communities around Greater Boston. Information about where the early voting is in your town or city are available through our website and through your local government website. And that's a place that will be less crowded. You can maybe spread out the line. But whatever you do, you have to vote. There are many important races on the ballot this year. We obviously have a Senate primary here in Massachusetts that affects everybody. We have races for the U.S. House in communities that affect most of our Jewish community. In the 4th, which covers Brookline and Newton and Needham and Sharon. But we also have a race in a district that covers parts of Boston and South Boston, including West Roxbury and the North End. And the North Shore has a primary as well. So there's so many important races that there's real consequences for our Jewish community. It's something I'm writing about, we're promoting, we're putting information. But go to our website, jcrcboston.org. You can find out information about how to research the candidates. You can find out information about how to vote safely. But whatever you do, please vote. And thank you for the opportunity to make that plug.
Thank you. One more time, our guest was Jeremy Burton, Executive Director of Jewish Community Relation Council, part of our big Jewish community and frontier organization in our community. Jeremy, thank you. Stay well, stay safe, continue your work, eat your preferred eggs, and as you say, please vote.
Yes.
To everybody else. And I just want to remind, yes, please.
Thank you, Vladimir, for having me on. It's always a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you. And I just want to say, Center Makor is supported by Combined Jewish Philanthropies Federation, Jewish Federation in Massachusetts, by sponsors, viewers like you. And if you support Center Makor, you support continuity of Jewish life in Russian-speaking community in Massachusetts. Thank you. Be healthy. Bye.